Sheriff.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I think this is the first time I've had to get up here publicly and address the board since I took off almost 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to do it. And so we're going to do a quick jail update. We'll touch on a little bit of things going on in the office. But in order to explain where we currently are, we have to give a little bit of history. So I'm going to try to, do I click this? Do I have to set it up?
Oh, sorry. My fault.
Oh, I even created a little fancy PowerPoint for you all.
You've been sheriff since 1855?
It's all the clean living that I do. The diet and exercise. So anyway, to explain a little bit where we were, as you can see on here in 2019, obviously again that was before I took office, the jail revenue was approximately $2.2 million. In 2020, the jail revenue dropped to 1.9. And then in 2021, we're at $1.4 million. So, obviously the question is, why the steady decline? And I'll give you one guess.
COVID.
So COVID-19 impacted us greatly, which led to some restrictions that we had placed upon us by several influencing factors. One being the CDC, which then gave their guidelines, which then the states adopted, which then the MDOC and the U.S. Marshals adopted, and the county health departments adopted, which in turn led to us at the local jail level implementing and adopting these restrictions as well. And given the fact that we are a congregate living facility, we have a little bit more stricter and lengthier restrictions placed upon us that currently some of them are still in place today. So in 2020, which is when COVID really hit around the country, our jail staff implemented mitigation strategies, which included the big one, restricting new admissions, and that was across the board, from patrol to the courts, U.S. Marshals, and MDOC. And this was reciprocal with both of those MDOC and U.S. Marshals. They weren't moving any prisoners around, so we weren't taking any in. Same with us. If we released some from our custody, we didn't replace those. So in 2020, as I mentioned earlier, that's where our numbers started to decline. We also restricted jail programming so that we weren't exposing people from the outside into the inside and vice versa. We also instituted COVID screening, which meant if somebody was brought into the facility, into the sally port or the garage, we did temperature checks and the rapid testing. And then depending on those results, depending on where they were placed in the facility. So we also implemented a quarantine protocol, which meant they were held in the booking area for a certain amount of days. And in the very beginning, it was 4 to 5 days, up to 10 days. And then as COVID went on, it was lessened to 48 hours. And then they were moved into a quarantine pod. And then once they got out of there with no positive results, then they were moved into general population.
So there are actually cells in the booking area?
Correct, there's 11.
And they stayed there for up to 4 or 5 days?
In the very beginning, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And also during 2021, we had sporadic positive COVID between inmates and the staff as we tried to safely raise our numbers on both ends. So we tried to increase our staffing and then also try to increase our numbers with the federal inmates. And then in 2022, we had 2 significant outbreaks. In January into February this year, we had 24 inmates that were positive, and then we also had 8 staff at the same time that were off due to COVID. So that put a strain on our staffing. And as soon as we recovered from that, again in August and September, we had another pretty good outbreak where 16 inmates tested positive, and then 5 staff members, and then we also had another 25 inmates in that same pod that were exposed or either direct contact with the positive cases. So in order to keep everyone safe throughout the facility, we had to keep our numbers down in general. So our population overall was down. Throughout the pandemic, from the beginning, we averaged about 150 inmates across the board, which, as you know, our capacity is 274. Had we not done that, we wouldn't have had the room to quarantine these pods that you saw there, and we would have had a much worse scenario on our hands. So another influencing factor, as I mentioned, was staffing. So in 2021, again, this is when I took office, so we had 2 full-time retirements, and at that time, we only had 2 part-time corrections deputies working. And so those 2 part-time deputies then were backfilled those 2 full-time positions that we lost, which left us with 8 part-time vacancies. So we had all those open. And so since 2021, it's been a steady stream trying to get people in here as far as applicants and new hires. And so once we would get some people in here, then we have retirements, resignations, and then those people would backfill, and then again, we just weren't getting the applicants. So I'll discuss here in 2022, we had 3 full-time resignations, and these were not people that just got into corrections, were only there a few months and decided this is not for me. One person was a 19-year employee, another was a 10-year employee, and I believe the other one was a 5-year employee. So contributing to that, in the paragraph down at the bottom, we had issues with morale, burnout. We had an issue with recalling deputies for emergencies, illness, and injury. So when we would call somebody, they either wouldn't answer the phone, or they weren't home, or they wouldn't return our calls. So then again, we were running short staff.
Are these folks on call? Are they supposed to answer?
Well, so that, we have a policy of that, yes, but it didn't have any teeth because, as you know, the unions had something to say about that. So if they're off duty and they're on call, they should be compensated. So, and if they didn't answer because they're not being compensated, so they're not technically on call, they weren't subject to discipline. So, moving a little bit forward, we worked with the board and the unions, and we entered negotiations early this year, and we settled the contract early. We raised the starting wage, and then we agreed to an on-call recall procedure, which did have teeth in it, that if they didn't answer their phone, then they could be subject to discipline. Which this has eased the burden and the stress on the current workforce. And as our intended purpose, it did increase the applicants that we're getting.
So just primarily for them, it was a starting wage increase.
That was a big part of it. Yeah, we were on the, Midland County was on the low end of the starting wage in the surrounding area.
But now we're not.
Correct. Now we are very competitive on both the starting wage and the high end, both on road patrol and on correction side. So other considerations being that influence the overall jail population. I know you guys have heard this before for those board members that have been around for a while. When the jail was first built and opened, Sheriff Nielsen at the time described it as the jail being a behavior-driven model, which there is some truth to that. However, the biggest driving force behind our jail population and our classification system is that. It's the classification of your crime, why you're in there. So we can't put somebody that's in there for a felony murder offense with somebody in there for not paying their child support. So we have to keep them separate. So that's a big determining factor, again, with the space available that we have, and when we're bringing these federal inmates from other parts of the country, when they're in there for serious offenses.
Is that by law or just
it is
behavior?
by law and liability.
Okay.
But it is written in the law that you have to separate the different classifications. So that's a big part of it too. Also during this time, as you all know, we have the specialty courts come online. And you have the mental health court, recovery court, My Hope, and all of these give alternatives to incarceration. So again, that's one reason why our local numbers are down. And then recent legislation in the last couple of years, law enforcement is now required to issue appearance citations rather than custodial arrest for minor infractions such as driving unsuspended, property crimes like retail fraud, those types of things. So that, again, is another influencing factor on why our overall numbers are down in the jail. So where are we at now? As I touched on, since taking off in 2021, I made it a priority to safely raise our staffing by filling the vacancies we had and increasing the U.S. Marshal population. In February, we had 36 inmates. This is February 2021. And by June, after talking with my jail captain and the jail administration over there, we safely raised up our population to 62. And then we averaged about 54 for the remainder of 2021. And then also, as I mentioned, in 2022, we had the 2 major COVID outbreaks. So we couldn't, as I mentioned also earlier, we couldn't replace the prisoners that left our facility and bring in new ones. So we didn't increase the federal numbers, but we still averaged about 47 per month. And we're currently on track to bring in about $1.7 million for this year. Currently with staffing, we have 2 full-time deputies off on short-term disability and another off with COVID. And then we also currently have 2 of the 3 full-time positions filled, with the 3rd starting at the end of the month. So we're going to have all of our full-time staff filled. And then we also have, finally and thankfully, all of the 8 part-time positions filled. But all of them but one are still in training, so most of them also still have to attend the required 160-hour corrections academy. So those deputies can't come online, work on themselves or by themselves until 12 weeks that they've been there, and then, like I said, another 4 weeks at the corrections academy. So it's a good 2 to 3 months that they can actually count as a staff member.
When was the last time we had all part-time filled?
That is a good question. It
been a
certainly
while.
wasn't since I've been here, and like I said, when I took over in 2021, we only had 2 part-timers there. So prior to that, I'm not sure. I was hoping my jail captain would be here, so he could answer that question, because he would know, because he's been there for a while.
I think it was actually 2018 or 19. It wasn't too long before COVID.
All right, and then, so since we will be full staff at current staffing levels, this will aid in our ability to safely increase the U.S. Marshal population and our overall opening it back up, depending on COVID, the RSV, the flu, depending on our intakes from the courts and patrol. And one thing that I did want to make clear, though, because I have heard this, is that some people have said that the jail has been closed. The jail has never been closed. It will never be closed. We've always taken in and made exceptions for inmates that deserve to be incarcerated. So just wanted to make that clear.
Were you hearing that internally in the county, or?
In some areas, yeah.
Okay.
But in any memos that I put out, I always made it clear that they can contact me after hours, the jail administration, and we'll make exceptions for, even if it was for a minor offense and it was a continuing action where they were causing problems continually, then we can make an exception for that under the law. So other positives, though, it's not just all negatives, but we're currently set to save approximately $125,000 in our food service budget. Common sense, because we haven't had the numbers, right? So we're not spending as much on food. So the budget for that, we're not using that. And then finally, on the road patrol side, we are in the final steps of offering 2 full-time deputies employment, which will bring our numbers up to current staffing levels due to a resignation and then a retirement.
Sheriff, quick question on the jail beds and bed days. You know, when we talked to Melissa, Marissa, sorry, thank you. I knew I said that. Marissa talks about jail bed days saved. And yet we talk about in the jail saying, hey, we're losing money.
Right.
I think we need a consistent message, because there's a really good reason for Marissa doing what she's doing and all those diversions. It's not necessarily a benefit to the county because of jail days, and it's our own people, right? It's within
Yeah.
the
Correct.
county.
And
So,
the whole purpose, and you're, Scott, I totally agree, but they are the same message, right? Like, the programs that Marissa's working with to save jail bed days means that that bed is open for us to house a federal marshal inmate. So we save local dollars because these are local inmates that we're not needing to pay incarceration costs for. And at the same time, that opens a spot if there's a need or a federal marshal inmate that
So-
needs to be in there.
dumb question, so when we bring an inmate in from the marshals,
Uh-huh.
do they qualify for any of these jail diversion programs? Whether it's drug court or,
No,
They're not ours,
yeah, they're not.
they're not ours?
Yeah.
they're not ours.
Okay.
We're
Makes-
just their hotel.
What's that?
Yeah,
They're
we
just
just-
there.
We're just their hotel.
They pay to stay.
They're doctors.
Right.
Pay to play.
Yeah, and I don't think any of the ones that we've taken are sentenced,
No.
prisoners, so they're all pre-sentenced.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, so we're just the pass-through until they go for their trial.
But pre-sentencing can last quite a while in federal
Correct.
court.
Okay.
Well, I'm at the question stage, if anybody else has any other questions?
Okay.
Yes, actually, at one of the townships last night, I did have a question, and it's pretty crazy that I can ask that, and he actually is very concerned about the situation that happened, and it is in Ingersoll, and you probably are aware of it. So he's actually gonna come in and I told him, he said, is there an opportunity for me to come in? And, yes, I said, absolutely, you have 3 minutes, so he probably will be here
Oh.
next Tuesday. But, and I told him that you folks did secure from MAC, where they talked to us about the, DOC grant for patrols. Did we take advantage of those monies from the state to increase our deputy numbers for patrols out in Out County?
Well, I'm not sure, are you talking about the secondary road patrol funding?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, so what happened with that is that the state, now our funding comes from the alcohol, tax, rather than every year the legislature having to vote on a formula and a, amount that each county would get. They still have that, but the amount where it's coming from is a
Liquor
more
tax.
stable
Yeah.
funding source. But, yeah, I mean, we participate in the 416 grant funding from the state, yes. But as far as increasing, I don't believe we qualify.
It doesn't actually give us enough money to add more officers on the road. It covers not even 100% of the officers that we have on the road that are assigned to that grant program. They're actually split between general fund funding and 416 funding. But I'm not sure,
It
I
sounds
don't
like a
know.
very, very positive and good thing, and
It
in
is.
fact, it doesn't really equate to as much. I mean, you've always had the liquor control money that flows through each county. I mean, that's always been a fact. That kind of knocked the wind out of my sails a little bit, because I was thinking that you had secured some of that funding. Additionally, this is sort of Fred, our health director's question too. Are you experiencing, like, who knows whether it's still COVID or RSV or the flu, and it doesn't really even matter, because I think they're all equally present within our community as well as every place else.
Yeah, depending on the symptoms that they're exhibiting, and then,
They're all the same,
and then
right?
testing, yeah.
If
That's how we
they
get
have
that.
flu or RSV, do you have the same quarantine procedures?
Absolutely.
Well, the whole RSV thing, is new.
Yeah.
So we have not experienced that yet in the jail, but I would imagine initially it would be treated the same. And then probably follow the same protocols with mask wearing and
Isolation.
quarantine, just to mitigate it so it doesn't spread.
And just final question for me, at least, the morale issue, do you think the things that you're putting in place right now, or have put in, or expect to put in, do you think that's gonna help with morale, or is there a more systemic problem that we need to know about?
No, I think is helping. I have talked to a couple of the staff just recently to ask them how it's been going. And again, the on-call procedure, part of the morale issue was that people getting called in on their days off. And again, being short-staffed, it was regular. And so again, they're getting burned out. And again, like I mentioned, I mean, we had some very seasoned employees that resigned because they had none. And again, thanks to all of you, that we were able to agree on an on-call schedule so that when they're off, they can relax. They're not stressed out about getting called in. They can go out of town. They can enjoy time with their family. And so it's a positive, and it is making a difference.
Any further questions for Sheriff? Thanks so much, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you guys.